Dr. Rod Berger is CultureCon's storyteller in residence and a globally recognized storytelling expert who has conducted more than 4,000 interviews for companies like Forbes, Entrepreneur, Global Podcasts, corporate leaders, agencies, and world-renowned universities. His work has taken him everywhere from meeting with the Pope to UN officials to refugee camps in Uganda, F1 garages, and the TEDx stage. He also served as a guest lecturer at Vanderbilt University, Owen Graduate School of Management for nearly 2 decades, exploring the power of storytelling in business. Also the author of The Narrative Edge and its companion field guide, which help leaders understand and shape the stories driving their decisions, cultures, and leadership. He has a doctorate in clinical psychology and brings a unique lens to helping leaders move from inherited stories to intentionally authored ones. Welcome to the virtual stage.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Excited to be here. All right. I want to start with a story. We've got a lot to get to, and I've seen a lot of faces or names I'm seeing in the chat, so it's great to see those that I know and those that I hope to get to know in the very near future, especially at CultureCon in August. Okay. It's 1988, and I'm in a minivan with my father. We're driving across Michigan, and he's telling me a story that I've heard maybe 100 times by then about the war, about being a boy in Germany who secretly listened to Allied radio broadcasts late at night, knowing that if anyone heard him, the consequences would be unspeakable. He told that story like it was the truth that explained him to himself. I believed every word. Decades later, a historian gently suggested to me that some of the details in that story may not have been entirely accurate, that my father might have, over the years, smoothed certain edges, heightened certain stakes, authored a version of his life that he could live inside. I had a choice in that moment. I could decide my father had lied to me, or I could ask a different question. Why did he need that version of the story to be true? Once again, as Zach said, I'm Dr. Rod Berger, and for those of you that have not met me before, it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I have spent over 2 decades, and I feel it. I'm coming up on a big birthday later in the fall after interviewing 4,000 folks across healthcare, manufacturing, finance, technology, politics, entertainment, from media outlets like Forbes and Entrepreneur Magazine, and then private media projects. And like they said, one of the most exciting things sort of the bucket list you didn't know you have, is when I had an audience with the late Pope Francis. And I've crisscrossed 5 continents, capturing stories about climate crises, Hall of Fame athletic careers, and entrepreneurial achievements. I work with individuals and I work with organizations. And for, like Zach said, almost 20 years, I guest lectured at Vanderbilt's Owen Graduate School of Management on the business of storytelling and narrative. Today, I'm going to reference my book and its companion with a forthcoming field guide. We'll talk a little bit about that later, which arrives later this summer. And as they were saying, look, this is the first time CultureCon's had a storyteller in residence, and it's really an honor to hold that title this year. And it's yielded even more experiences and pushed me in ways to learn more about myself and community and the stories that I get to tell and participate in being hopefully a useful storyteller. Zach, Nick, I want to thank you guys for the platform. CultureCon has built something really, really rare, and I know that everybody knows that on this call and across the community, because all of you are people who care about culture in ways that I hope I hope it's contagious. It's not a small thing in 2026. Before I discuss the overview of today's webinar, I want to name something because I know it's on the table for every leader in this room. This is not a binary choice. We're not living in an either-or world. Today, I'm going to show you a case study I built in partnership with AI. Our relationship to trust has to change because we cannot afford to be in the business of building a moat between ourselves and reality. I think what we actually need to be doing is building bridges to new destinations, and authentic storytelling is how we build the trust that opens the path to them. That's the posture I want us to hold for the next hour. Not story or data, not human or machine. Story is the thing that makes the data trustworthy. Story is the bridge. Okay, that is sort of a preamble. A quick overview of where we're going to go for the next hour. First, I'm going to tell you what I think is actually happening underneath the leadership conversations you're having every day. The data on this is striking, and most of it dropped within the last 90 to 120 days. Second, I'm going to give you a way of thinking about story that's not soft, not decorative, and not optional. Story is the operating system of trust. I'll say it again. Story is the operating system of trust. I'm going to show you why, and I'll show you the 4 pillars I diagnose it on. And then third, I'm going to introduce you to a posture I've been practicing for all my time working and asking questions of people, even if they didn't want me to ask them. I call it the trusted co-author, and I will work to show you a case from inside that effort. And then fourth, I'm going to put a set of questions in your hands that you can sit with tomorrow morning, on the weekend, the holiday weekend. I'm going to do something at the end that I don't normally do, which is I'm going to open the door to a small handful of you to spend an hour with me one-on-one on the story or trust issue inside your organization. That's the arc. Let's go ahead and get into it. Most of us are living inside stories we never chose to author. That realization for me hit at 30,000 feet over the African continent after studying the origin stories of refugees in Uganda. That declaration changed how I see almost everything that I do. Because what I came to understand is that most of us are living inside stories we never consciously chose to author. They were handed to us by parents, by teachers, by bosses, managers, leaders, by cultures, by industries that needed us to perform a particular role inside their particular narrative. And the moment we're in right now is the moment those inherited stories are starting to crack. Okay, before we discuss the data, I know Zach and Nick talked about engagement, so let's do a couple of things. I'll be asking you questions in the chat. And I want to know where you are right now. So let's just start with your first name and the city that you're sitting in. That's it. 2 words, no bio, no title, no company, just where on the map you're in right now. I'm in Nashville, and I'm Rod, so I guess I went first there. So please drop those into the chat. 1, I just love travel, so it's fun. Wow, Bloomington, Wisconsin, Indiana, Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, Oregon. Oh, we've got someone else in Nashville. Hope, thank you for being here. New Jersey, Mexico City. Man, this is pretty. Another Nashville. Okay, this is super fun. I just love travel. I love knowing other people's stories and where they are, and that you've been willing to spend time, especially during this time of year with graduations and the end of school. All right, so let's now get into why I think you showed up. This past January in Davos, Richard Edelman released the 2026 Trust Barometer. It's the 26th year of that survey. They polled almost 34,000 people across 28 countries. And the headline this year was different from any I've seen in the time I've been tracking the work. 7 in 10 people now say that they are unwilling or hesitant to trust someone whose values, background, or worldview differs from their own. Edelman calls this insularity, not polarization, not grievance, insularity. People are not just disagreeing with each other anymore, they're retreating from each other. Workplace-specific consequences, Edelman talks about, show it even further. 42% of people would rather switch departments than report to a manager with different values. And 34% would put less effort into a project led by someone with different political beliefs. Now, here in the U.S., that doesn't seem to be terribly shocking, given the news cycle that just seems to speed up with every second, as almost like compound interest. Now, here's the wrinkle that should matter to every person on this webinar. Trust did not evaporate, it migrated. Over the past 5 years, trust in national government leaders is down 16 points. Trust in major news organizations is down 11, and trust in foreign business leaders is down 6. Those are floor collapsing numbers. But look at the other column. Trust in my CEO is up 9 points. Trust in my coworkers is up 11. And in my neighbors, my family, my friends, 11 as well. Globally, 66% of employees now say they trust their CEO. 2/3, read that number again, 2/3. In a year when trust is nearly every major institution cratered, the CEO held. It's not a vote of confidence, though, in CEOs as a class. I want to make sure I underscore that. It's a vote of confidence in proximity. The leaders inside that 66% are the leaders whose stories live close enough to be heard. The ones whose names people know, the ones whose decisions people can attach to a face and a voice, and on a good day, a few specific moments where they got it right or they got it wrong out loud. The leaders outside the 66% are the ones running organizations where if you stopped a random employee in the hallway, they could not tell you a single story about the person in the corner office, not one. Most likely, both types of leaders are present in the companies that we represent today. I'm not making a moral judgment. I want to make that clear. I'm naming a structural fact about the moment that we're in. Here's the second piece of data, which arrived in April. Gallup State of the Global Workplace Report. Global employee engagement fell to 20%, the lowest reading since 2020. Lost productivity from disengagement is estimated to be $10 trillion. That's 9% of global GDP. Managers used to be the most engaged people in any organization. Gallup calls that the engagement premium. And in 2025, that premium nearly disappeared. Manager engagement fell 5 points in a single year and is now barely distinguishable from the people they lead, 9 points lower than it was in 2022. Translation? The people responsible for telling the company's story to the team have, at a global level, stopped believing the story themselves. And then SHRM's 2026 CHRO priorities report dropped, and 46% of chief human resource officers ranked leadership and manager development as their number one priority for the year. Not compensation, not AI integration, though we might think that's what it is, not retention or leadership credibility. So let me say plainly what these three reports are telling us in concert. Trust has retreated to the inner circle. The managers who used to carry the story to the circle are no longer engaged enough to carry it. And the chief people officers responsible for fixing this have decided that leadership credibility is the single most urgent problem on their desks. That is the moment. Now, let me tell you why I believe story is the only durable answer to it. Okay, I want to do something before we go into the next section. Because I just dropped these three data points on you, and data is useless unless it touches something specific in your own life, at least in my own experience. So in the chat, I want you to answer one question, one line. You do not need to write a paragraph. When did you first feel the trust shift inside your organization? Not when did you read about it? When did you feel it? Maybe it was a meeting where the room went quiet in a way it never used to. Maybe it was a town hall where the questions in the question and answer box got sharper. Maybe it was a one-on-one where a team member said something you did not expect them to say to you. One line. Drop it in the chat, and we can read a few of them in 60 seconds. And my only suggestion would be to avoid responses that are political or that name a specific employer for obvious reasons. I love that. Eva Maria, when everybody said yes to everything every time, I think a lot of us have been in those situations. Or, Christy, I appreciate when you're saying executives sidestep pain points mentioned by employees. And yeah, Brianna, 2 acquisitions combined with retirement of founding CEO. Yeah, transitions are never easy. Okay, while some of you continue to type, I'm going to come back to it in a few minutes because the framework I'm about to give you is the diagnostic for the moment that you just described. There's a distinction at the heart of the work that I do that I want to put in front of you. I draw it in The Narrative Edge, my book, and I sit with leaders inside it almost every week. The distinction is between authored stories and assigned stories. An authored story is one you have examined, claimed, and chosen to live inside. You know why it's yours, you know what it does for you, and you know where it came from and why you kept it. An assigned story is one that was handed to you by the people who raised you, by the schools that ranked you, by the companies that promised you or did not, by the industry whose conventional wisdom you absorbed before you ever questioned it. Most professional lives are built almost entirely out of assigned stories. Most companies are too. And here's what is happening in this insularity moment that Edelman spoke of. The assigned stories are losing their hold. When the assigned story stops holding, you have one of two options. You either fight to defend it, which is what insularity looks like in practice, or you pick up the pen and you start authoring. And this is something now I want to talk about that it's, for whatever reason, feedback that I've gotten on the book, this is one area that has gotten a lot of attention in private messages that I get. But I want to talk about what authoring actually sounds like, because if it stays abstract, it's useless to you. There are essentially two kinds of professional storytellers. I call them police report storytellers and kitchen table storytellers. Police report storytellers give you the facts, the dates, the bullet points, the LinkedIn version, the press release. It's accurate, it's verifiable, it's what every leader I have ever worked with defaults to under pressure, and it is completely forgettable. In fact, those folks, when I'm asked to interview them for media, I typically turn away because I find myself speaking to a robot. Now, kitchen table storytellers do something very different. They pull up a chair, they pour you a drink, not literally, but they pour you a drink in sentimentality. They lean in and they say, let me tell you what really happened. The facts are still there, the accuracy is still there, but the story has been routed through a human being instead of through a press release. So here's the question that matters. Look at the last 5 communications you sent to your team. Last week's all hands, the Slack message about the reorg, the email about Q1 numbers, the LinkedIn post about your latest funding round. How many of those were police reports and how many were kitchen tables? If you're honest with yourself, most of them are probably police reports. We've been trained by business school, by corporate communications departments, and by lawyers who are doing their jobs, so this is not an affront to lawyers, to default to the police report under pressure. In 2026, trust data tells us that the police report no longer works. People don't believe institutional language anymore. They've stopped reading past the headline. They're looking for someone, anyone, who will basically sit at the table and tell them what is actually happening. Your team isn't waiting for you to be more polished. I think they're waiting for you to be more proximate. And that to me is the foundation really that represents where we are today. Now, this goes back to my work at Vanderbilt, and this wasn't something that I did right out of the gate, but I learned after cohort and spending time with them over 2 decades as a guest lecturer at their business school of management. So every year I would sit with the incoming class of accounting students, and I would print every resume, sit down with a yellow highlighter, and try to find out what was actually interesting about that person. It was almost impossible, not because they lacked depth. They had it. They're brilliant minds, all of them, and many of them I stay in contact with today. The problem was that they had been conditioned to report their lives rather than share them. They buried the lead, as we might say in journalism, on the narratives that actually defined them. They had inflated their accomplishments as if they had just negotiated the purchase of Alaska. So I would ask them a question that I want to ask you right now. Take a few seconds and answer it in your head. If I removed your title, your company name, and every credential after your name, what story would you tell about who you are and why you do this work? Now, I don't want to leave that question hanging in your head. I want you to try it. So go ahead, go open the chat, take 60 seconds, in 1 or 2 sentences, not a paragraph, write the story you would tell about who you are and why you do the work. if you could not lean on your title to tell it for you. Think as if you're at a cocktail party or a conference and you didn't have your lanyard or your business card. How would you describe yourself? I know it's harder than it sounds. Most of you are going to want to try and type the resume version first. I get it. Resist that if you can. Try again. What is the smaller, more specific story underneath what you're inclined to tell automatically? I'll go first, just to give you a brief thing here. But I know I do this work because I have sat across from everyone from refugees who've had nothing left but their story, and CEOs who had everything except a story that they could believe in. And that gap I found in airports and in layovers in different worlds, that gap between those two rooms is smaller than anyone wants to admit. I like that. We don't want to lose creativity, Elizabeth. I like that. I'm able to get creative and help others. Marcus Conyers. Hello, sir. How are you? I am lucky to learn from great people, to try things out, fail, and then have breakthroughs that I teach through stories. So true. Jan, good to see you. Jan Madura, enjoy reading research and so enjoy sharing what I learned that I think I will be valuable to others. And you're Jan Madura. If people connect with folks, you're also an incredible representative, I think an ambassador for engagement across LinkedIn and sharing stories and helping to support people. So I'm happy to see you here. Okay. Thank you for all of you for putting yourself out there and just the chat. But you did in 90 seconds, for those of you that participated in that question, what I sit with leaders for hours to figure out. The practice going under the title of the story, that is the practice. And it's the practice the trust environment is asking every leader to learn right now. The deeper version of the question that you just answered is the one I used most often at Vanderbilt over those years. And I call it loosely the Vanderbilt question. So I'll ask it here. What is the greatest misconception about you? And what is the true story that contradicts it? The full exercise lives in the field guide that's coming out this summer. The point is the same one that I'm making to you here. The misconception you've stopped correcting is the doorway into the story that earns proximity. And if you struggled with that question, you're not alone. Most leaders I work with can't answer it without a beat of silence first. That silence is the whole problem, because that's the story your team is actually trying to read off of you. That's the story your customers are looking for when they decide whether to trust you with the next chapter of their lives. I call that authority positional power, not the power that comes from the title, but the power that comes from the story underneath the title. And in the trust environment we're in right now, the story underneath the title is the only kind of authority that travels. Okay, now let's go into the 4 quadrants. This is a frame that I use with every leader. This started out on a beverage napkin on a Turkish airline flight to Dubai. So it looks a lot cleaner now. It survived the flight. But I want to give this to you because to me, it's a simple tool that I have for sourcing the kind of story that earns the proximity. And I call it the 4 quadrants: personal, professional, passions, and pursuits. Now, most leaders are fluent in 2 of these. They can tell you about their professional history, and they can tell you about the pursuits they're working toward. The resume and the roadmap. That's the police report version of a human being. The leaders who are earning trust right now are fluent in all 4. They can move between quadrants in a single conversation. They can tell you about their family in a way that connects to a strategic decision. They can tell you about a hobby that has nothing to do with work, and you walk away understanding their leadership philosophy better than you did before. The 4 quadrants is not a personality test. It's a map of where your stories live. Most of us have starved. I'm going to use that word again. That was an intentional word. Most of us have starved 2 or 3 of these quadrants because we've been told only one of them is professionally useful. The cost, in my estimation, of that starvation in 2026 is that you have nothing left to draw on when your team needs you to be a person. So let's talk a little bit about this starved quadrant, if you will. I want to take a quick sort of read from the room. Look at those 4 quadrants on your screen. Personal, professional, passions, and pursuits. Which one is the most starved in your current professional life? Not which one matters least. Which one have you stopped feeding because the role that you're in does not seem to make space for it? One word in the chat. Personal, professional, passions, or pursuit. That's it. And then hold on to your answer. It's a clue because the quadrant you just named is connected to something larger, and that something larger is what I want to show you next. So Hope says pursuits, Marcus professional, Stephanie passions. More pursuits, more pursuits, more pursuits. I'm seeing a trend here, Zach and Nick. Okay. So I appreciate that. And I, like I said, that word choice is really intentional when it comes to starved, right? Because it's something that we need that fuels us in our own unique way. And I think that's important to acknowledge. Okay. Now I want to talk about the narrative stack. So the 4 quadrants I just showed you are not 4 parallel categories. Think of them as 4 floors of a single structure. And I call that the narrative stack. So the foundation floor is professional. The role, the record, the surface story, the version of you that fits on the back of a business card. It's where most leaders are most rehearsed, and it's the first floor that has to be coherent. Because if the story you tell in the boardroom does not match the story your team tells in the parking lot, nothing built on top of it will hold. Now, 1 floor up is personal. Your inner life, your identity, the relationships and chapters that shape who you are when no one's watching. This floor has to be authored, not assigned. That is conviction. It's the deepest personal work of a leadership career, and almost no one gets to it without a guide. Now, 1 floor up is passions. What lights you up? I mean, I know as a CultureCon community, I would imagine it's culture, it's people, it's engagement. What would you do for free? The thing you used to talk about before you got promoted into the version of yourself who only talks about quarterly metrics. This floor has to land when you bring it. It has to register in the room. That's resonance. It's the difference between a kitchen table moment and a police report. Now, the top floor, whoops, excuse me there. The top floor is pursuits. What you're building, chasing, becoming. The roadmap, the future-facing story. This is the floor most leaders are most comfortable on because it's the floor pointed at the world, and it's the floor that has to be legible to the outside world, to investors, to candidates, to customers, to anyone who will only ever meet you on the top floor of your stack. That's legibility. Every one of those 4 floors is held up by 4 pillars. The same 4 pillars: coherence that I mentioned, conviction, resonance, and lastly, legibility. They're not assigned one to a floor. They run under every floor, which means your professional floor has its own coherence question and its own legibility question. So does your personal floor. So do your passions. So do your pursuits. At 16 diagnostic intersections, 16 places a story can leak, another important word for today, and 16 places a story can hold. This is the architecture I work inside of. So when I sit with a leader, a leadership team, an organization, or a board, the question is never just what is your story? The question is which floor and which pillar. We diagnose where the leak is and we go there first. Hold this picture in your head because every knockout question that I'm going to be putting in front of you in a few minutes lives on a specific floor of this stack. You will hear the architecture before you see it again. 4 floors, 4 pillars, 1 stack, same diagnostic, every floor. So here is where I want to introduce you to a phrase that has been forming in me over the last several months as I've watched these data points line up. I think of myself when I'm at my best as a trusted co-author. But I want you to look at how that is written on your screen, because the parenthetical matters. Trust, then ED in parentheses, then co-author. Read it one way and it says trusted co-author. Read it the other way and it says trust co-author. Both readings are intentional. The trusted reading is what the work has to earn. Let me say that again. The trusted reading is what the work has to earn. You don't get to declare yourself trusted. The people you sit with confer that on you slowly after you have proven you can be trusted with the parts of the story they've not told anyone else. The trust reading is what the work is actually about. I'm not a co-author of memoirs. I am a co-author of the stories of trust that organizations need to be able to tell their people, their customers, their boards, and themselves, especially when the trust has cracked. And the parenthetical ED itself is a nod to the educator's role inside the work. I don't write your story. I educate you in how to source it, examine it, and tell it in a way that meets the moment. That's the partnership. So let's make this concrete, because I just mentioned it. And because I want to make sure that when we leave this hour, that you have a precise sense of what work looks like in this moment, not a vague sense that storytelling is just something that we need to have at the table. So when we sit with a leader or leadership team, the work moves in 3 rhythms. Source is number 1. It's a methodology I call the knockout questionnaire, or that's really the activator of it. These are not interview questions. I've done that forever. These are questions designed to get past the prepared answers, the ones every leader has rehearsed for the podcast circuit and into the territory where the actual stories live. The stories about the misconception you have made peace with, the stories about the role you were assigned in your family before you were old enough to consent to it, the stories about the chapter you are afraid to talk about, which is almost always the chapter that contains the real lesson. The campaign promise of a knockout is a simple line. Questions that they've never heard. Stories they have always carried. Stories they have always carried is something that does reveal itself in almost every interview I do with a leader. And that's when the connection truly happens. These questions are mine, the stories are yours. My job is to ask the question precise enough that the story you have been carrying for years can finally set itself down. Sourcing is harder than it sounds, because most leaders have not been they've not actually been asked the right question in years. They've been asked the same 5 questions on every panel, every podcast, every onboarding deck and panel. The result is that even leaders themselves no longer remember what their actual story is. They remember the version that they have rehearsed. Second, I examine the story with them. This is where the educator's role kicks in. See, we have to help leaders see which stories are authored and which ones are assigned. We need to help them see where the story is doing work for them and where the story is quietly costing them. And often that gap is quite wide. I help them see that when a story has reached its natural end and a new story is trying to be born underneath it, to embrace that. You see, this is the part of the work that almost no consulting firm does, or weekend course is going to teach you or work with you on. Because the leaders that I sit with are not interested in being told what to think. They're interested in being asked questions that they cannot answer in a single setting. That is what an examination is. And third, we author, by which I mean we shape the story into something the leader can actually deploy inside the organization, inside a board meeting, inside a difficult conversation, inside a public moment that calls for them to meet the moment instead of dodging it. The output of authoring is not a manuscript. It's a leader who can walk into a room, tell the right story at the right altitude, in the right register, in the moment it actually matters. That's the deliverable. Everything else is preparation. I want to give you an example of what this looks like in the wild, as they might say. A few years ago, I was backstage in Oslo, Norway. I was about to interview someone who's become a dear friend now, Jonas Hemmingstøl. And he is a bit of an infamous founder of a company that had flirted with unicorn status and then nearly gone bankrupt in front of 700 of the leading social impact and climate investors across Europe. Just as we were about to be introduced to the stoic, crisp, upper-lipped audience of the Nordics, I thought about the day prior when I first met Jonas. See, like countless CEOs and founders, Jonas had been burned by conjecture and clickbait media. He was nervous. I was stressed. I was in a new environment. Jet lag. I could feel that the standard interviewer and guest dance was not going to produce anything worth listening to once on stage. So I did something I now do almost reflexively when the moment calls for it. I broke the fourth wall. I set the conventional barrier between us aside, and I told Jonas about the death of my own company at one point, about the slow death of the aftermath and what that felt like, about the parts of it I had rarely told anyone. And I laid claim to the four quadrants as if floors in a building connecting with Jonas on my professional pursuits, driven by my personal passions. He looked up at me and he said, and we were in a park bench, it was a Sunday in Oslo, and he said, "You understand me." Flash forward the next day, as our names are being bellowed across the stage in what looked like the inside of Google in Oslo, I looked at Jonas and I said, "Trust me." And he looked at me and he said, "That process started yesterday." Now, that day, against every cultural norm I had been told to expect from a Scandinavian executive, Jonas told me about the panic attacks, the fear, what he came to understand was PTSD from the near collapse of his company. Within weeks of that honest reflection live, he had secured the new investment to author his next entrepreneurial chapter. People had finally seen him, and he was able to basically battle what had been conjecture just so they could see the real him. I did not write Jonas's story. I sourced it. I examined it with him in real time, and I helped him author a version of it he could put back into the world. That's the work. Last month, just like I had to break the convention of legacy storytelling approaches with Jonas, I received a call from a CEO about the moat, this is my word, the moat that his company was unknowingly building between truth and reality. Now, for today's webinar, I challenged myself, not only a conventional case study white paper approach that maybe a lot of us are used to, but my own trust issues with storytelling technology to illustrate this case study using the new paintbrushes of AI. So sit back and you'll just watch a brief case study. A few weeks ago, I sat down with the CEO of a manufacturing company. 4,000 employees, 5 plants, 3 administration offices, a consolidation coming in 90 days that was going to reshape both operations and production. He told me the consolidation made sense on paper. The financials were clean, the strategy was sound, the leadership team had already started communicating the change, and yet trust was already eroding. The community had started talking. The chatter was centered on numbers before and after the consolidation. And every conversation in the parking lot was a conversation the leadership team was not in. What the CEO called a communication problem was actually a coherence leak. The story they were telling in the boardroom did not match the story their employees were telling in the parking lot. In the boardroom, the story was a pursuit. We are consolidating to position the company for the next decade. Read through legibility, clean data, clear roadmap, defensible decisions. In the parking lot, the story was personal. Where will I park? Who picks up my kids if I'm working an extra 40 minutes from home? What happens to my marriage when I'm gone 2 more hours a day? 2 different floors of the stack, 2 different pillars, one story leaking from the foundation up. Basically, it talks about this manufacturing company and how they had to change the way in which they thought because they were not being thoughtful about what was going on, not outside. They weren't focused on what was going on inside and the change in schedules, the change in expectations, the rhythm of work and environments around a consolidation. And that's why they were building a moat unknowingly. Now, look, Edelman tells us that trust has migrated to proximity. Gallup tells us managers have stopped believing the story they are paid to carry. Sherm tells us that chief people officers know it. The case I just shared with you underscores the blind trust that we unwittingly place in the transfer of stories across our organizations. A culture officer I interviewed for CultureCon recently, Todd Wiesenberg, said something to me that I have been carrying since. And Todd, if you're here, hello, how are you, sir? He said that culture is never neutral. Every meeting that runs over, every recognition that does not happen, every silence in a town hall, each one is a cultural act. The story underneath, those acts, those are the asset. All right, I have a companion line that I keep returning to in my work. Our stories validate our presence. Our telling authenticates our experience. The first half is who you are. The second half is whether the room can feel it. Todd is right that culture is never neutral, in my estimation. The question is whether the telling of your culture is doing the validating or whether the silence is. In a trust recession, story is the only asset class that holds its value when the others fall. If you can answer yes to one question, you have a narrative edge. If you answer no, you have a trust deficit that will compound every quarter you leave it unaddressed. And the question is this: when your team turns around to look at you, does the story they see match the story you have been telling them? Okay, this is a quick check. On this page, it takes 3 minutes. If you want to, you can go ahead with your phone and engage the QR code. This gives you a snapshot of how your storytelling currently functions as a leadership instrument. The deeper diagnostic, the stack, the 4 pillars, where each one might be leaking in your organization, that's the work that we do together in a trusted session that I mentioned earlier. Take the quick check, take the assessment, and if you want to go deeper, the application form is right there on the same page. As I said, I'm going to be offering this up to 3 folks that are on the webinar today. I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to take that if you want. I should say about the quick assessment, there are three parts. Part 1 asks you how confidently you can tell the 4 stories every leader needs: the origin story, the vision story, the value story, and the transformation story. Part 2 asks how often in the last 90 days you actually told those stories in the rooms that mattered. Part 3 asks the question I've asked about 20 minutes ago: if you removed your title and your credentials, what story would you tell? This score is going to sort you into one of 4 bands: story opportunity, emerging narrator, developing storyteller, and narrative leader. Now, in the chat, if you want to, like Tommy, I'd love to be one of the 3. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. In the chat, if you want to type the band that you think you would land in if you took the assessment right now, for those of you who are taking it. So, story opportunity, emerging narrator, developing storyteller, or narrative leader. Just the name. No one's going to judge you. And frankly, the people who type narrative leader are usually the ones with the most surprising results. And whatever you typed, I should say that should be considered your hypothesis. The assessment is your test. You can, I'll reply to your emails later on to sort of share what I'm seeing from what you've got there. But I will tell you, the most senior leaders I do work with, they score in the emerging narrator or developing storyteller range on first attempt. It's not a failing grade. It's a starting point. And the leaders I see move from developing to narrative leader inside a single quarter are the ones who decide to take the work seriously. Assessment's free for those of you who are wondering about it. And there's a question in the back end that I read to myself every week. If something you read in the results gives you pause, shoot me an email. Okay. Before I close, I want to do one last thing. I want to put 5 questions in front of you, because the truth is you came to a webinar called The Trusted Co-Author, and you deserve to leave with a taste of what one actually sounds like. These are knockout questions, and I've given reference to these knockout questions throughout the webinar. Each one sits at the intersection of one of the 4 quadrants and one of the 4 pillars I named earlier. They're not designed to be answered in chat. They're designed to be carried home. The campaign line for this work is the line on your screen. Questions they've never heard, stories they have always carried. These are the questions. The stories are already inside you. I'm just naming the doorway. So I'm going to go through these. You can read them, but they're not meant to be worked on right now. If I sat down separately with your board chair, your head of HR, the person who has worked for you the longest, and I asked each of them, why your organization exists, would I hear 3 versions of the same story or 3 different stories? And you can see at the top, I've labeled knockout, professional times coherence. The second question. What is the chapter of your life you have stopped telling at work, and what would it cost you to put 1 sentence of it back on the table? When was the last time you let a room see you care about something that was not on your scorecard or agenda? And what happened to the temperature of that room when you did? If your most important external audience for the next 12 months described your organization in their own words tomorrow, would the description match the one you've been telling yourself? And the last one of the 5, are you the author of your story, or are you a character in someone else's? And which of the 4 quadrants will tell you the truth first if you ask it? Now, if those 5 questions feel like too much to carry home all at once, I want to give you one more thing, just to knock them over, just for fun. No, a smaller thing, an old thing. Legend has it that Ernest Hemingway was once challenged to write a complete story in 6 words. He wrote, "For sale, baby shoes never worn. 6 words, 1 story, a whole world." In the field guide, I engage with this as a 6-word story exercise. It's the first instrument I give every leader I work with because the constraint of 6 words forces you to identify what actually matters. So here's your take home. Sometime in the next 24 hours, write 6 words, just 6. The version of yourself you most want to author next. You can throw it away after. My hunch, you won't throw it away. You will write more like it. And like I said, because Nick and Zach have given me this room, and because the people in this room are people I'd really enjoy working with, I'm going to open up 3 private sessions to people on the webinar. I'm calling them Trusted Co-Author Sessions. Each one is an hour Zoom call with me. I'll diagnose a single most consequential story or trust issue inside your organization. We'll run a live coherence read against the framework you just saw, and we'll work to tell what I see, what I would source next if I had more time, and where I would point your leadership team. It's not a sales call. These are working sessions. You walk away with one usable diagnosis and a clear sense of whether the work that I and others do is the work you actually need here in 2026. To be considered, take the quick leadership assessment if you haven't. Tell me the story or trust issue you would want to put on the table in the application. I'll select 3. Selection is not, this is important, selection is not about the size of your title. It's not about it's about actually the specificity, I should say, of the issue at hand. I will personally read every reply, and the 3 winners are going to hear from me by the end of the month. So I do appreciate your time and consideration of that. A couple more things briefly. Narrative Edge, Authentic Storytelling That Meets the Moment is the book that holds everything I've discussed today. It's published by my friends at Wiley and wherever you buy books. The Narrative Edge Field Guide is the companion. It comes out later this summer, and when you take the quick assessment, you can click a box that says "I'll notify you" and you can get a 20% discount on that field guide when it comes out. And it's the companion, and it's for leaders who want to do the work. If I'm being blunt, the book is the why. The field guide is the how, and it's built around what I call the EDGE method: explore, discover, grow, and engage. The same rhythm you saw on this webinar in compressed form. Source, examine, author. Expand it into something you can practice on the page across 12 chapters. And if you take the assessment and find yourself in the emerging narrator territory, the field guide is where I would start. If you find yourself in a developing storyteller, the book and the field guide together are designed to be read in tandem. And if you score narrative leader, I would still bet that you'll find 5 questions in the field guide that you have not answered yet. 2026 Edelman data told us that trust has retreated to the inner circle. Gallup data told us that the people meant to carry the story to the circle have stopped believing it. The SHRM data told us that the CHROs know it. None of that is fixable through a memo, a bonus structure, or a reorg. It's fixable through a conversation, the kind of conversation that happens at a kitchen table, not on a press release. The kind of conversation that requires a leader who knows their own story well enough to tell it without hiding behind their business card. So here's the question that I want you to sit with after we sign off. If trust is retreating to the inner circle, what story do you want to be telling with a steady voice and a clear conscience when your team finally turns around to look at you? That's the work. That's the moment we are meeting. If you chose not to take the quick assessment, no worries. I'll follow up with an email with QR code to the webinar participants. I know we're coming towards an end here. I am so disappointed. I worked very hard, I will tell you. And I got my kids to approve the animation of the case study. I don't know if that's just a Canva and a Zoom issue or the torrential rain that I've got here for those of us here in Nashville or in Williamson County. But it's been a real pleasure to be a part of this. And Nick and Zach, I know you have been getting questions. You sent me a note from people that are sending, I guess, individual questions. If you want to just give me one of them, and then I'll try to answer that. But I want to make sure that I honor people's time, especially midweek.
Definitely. Well, first off, thanks for that amazing webinar. And I can vouch. I've seen the animation. It's amazing.
I've got to find a way. We'll get it on the website or something. Okay.
Quick, I know we have time for like 1 or 2 questions. So first one is, how do you tell a story when the company is going through layoffs?
Boy, I feel like this. I'm hearing this question at the soccer field for my kids. I'm sure I'll hear it at a basketball tournament for my daughter this weekend on Memorial Day weekend. Look, to me, that's exactly the moment police report communication fails hardest. People can read a layoff memo for what it's not saying. I talk about in the field guide a section on crisis communication that distinguishes the burning platform story, right? The possibility story and the journey story. Most leaders will default to one of them in these situations. And the leaders who hold trust through layoffs, I think that they deploy all 3 and in sequence with intention.
Such a good point. I think we have time for one more quick here. I'm not a CEO. I'm a mid-level manager. Does this still apply?
Oh, I think it applies more, not less. Love that question. Look, Gallup told us managers are the engagement collapse driver, right? I mean, you are the proximity layer. Your team trusts you more than they trust the C-suite. That's the leverage that you may not be using, would be my guess. And that was part of the reason or the origin of the quick assessment that I handed out, was designed for leaders at every level in that manner.
Definitely. Well, that brings us right to time here. As Darren Ike said in the chat, a mighty fine book and a mighty fine webinar. So thank you for both, Rod.
Thank you, Darren.
Everyone in the chat, if you haven't checked out the book, definitely give it a read. It's amazing. It'll make you kind of rethink about your own story and how you're telling stories, which is so important in this day and age. And we hope to see you all in Madison with Rod on stage in just a couple months here. So thanks again, Rod. Really appreciate it.